I want to know a little bit about when you advocated for the abolishment of the death penalty. How did you get, I mean, I guess I can guess, but how did that turn up on your plate as something that you were going to pay attention to?
Well, the first memory of it that I have is getting a call from somebody, I don't remember who, I don't know the name of the case, but I get a call from an attorney to ask me to come down to the court and to testify about, I guess, the Catholic Church's position at that point, because the church wasn't always where it is now on that, but it became that in the early 60s, because for the people who may not know that, in the early 60s, the death penalty had kind of fallen off the charts, and then in 72, the Supreme Court struck it down, but not because it was unconstitutional, but it was being applied arbitrarily and discriminatorily. So it came back in 76 because laws got passed that it was felt met the Supreme Court standard that you've got to isolate these cases to a very narrow group of people and circumstances. It can't be robbery and no death, you know, because there were black people. And there was a guy named Bobby Jones in Louisville who went to death row in Kentucky for a robbery that got committed. You know, and he wasn't even the main guy. So that kind of death penalty got struck down and got more narrow. But anyway, this case came, and this was before 72, because that guy would have been released. And I'll explain why. But I went down, I testified. It was Ben Shove's court, and there was no jury present, just testified about life and human life and things, why the death penalty was wrong and why we shouldn't be killing people and stuff like that. And that was my first, that was just something that I felt, well, you know, and it was an African-American defendant. And so that passed, and I think that guy got a death sentence. I think he was on Eddyville in 72, when that handed down, and that group of people, I believe it was 23 people, their sentences all got reduced to life and all of them eventually made parole, but a guy named Anderson, I think, who died there, he wouldn't leave. He had just was acclimated to prison and wouldn't leave. So I don't know when it became an issue again, but it somewhere along the line in the late 70s, by that time the Supreme Court had brought it back, Kentucky had sentenced a couple of people to death, and I began to hear about people's interest in the death penalty, because I still was opposed to it. And Susie Post, the George and Jean, what's his name?
I know too.
Anyway, they were having meetings, and we had these like monthly meetings to talk about. There'd be a group of about maybe 10 to 15 people there, and then we began to hear about small groups in other parts of the state, and so we pulled together one day on a Saturday. We all came to Frankfort and met each other and kind of talked about we need to, you know, to form kind of a coalition of people and individuals, and that kind of sparked that. Susie had hired Carl Enoch. It was a intern for his work at Kent School, and he helped organize through the ACLU to get this thing going.
Susie Post, who's in the Hall of Fame, she was the head of the ACLU at that time.
Right, yeah.
Kentucky.
Yeah. And so we finally dawned on them. I remember the night I was at one of these meetings, a little potluck, George and Gene Edwards. They had a little potluck, everybody's happy, we were all in agreement on, we all hate the death penalty, right? But and finally I said, you know, I'm not coming back. I said, we're not going to end the death penalty sitting here talking to one another. We've got to go to Frankfort. We have got to change, you know. So at that point, we meaning Kevin McNally, and a couple of other attorneys, started visiting the legislators, and we promised them that we would not reveal what they said, but we had 3 questions for them, and we were just trying to. What do you think about the death penalty? What do you think about killing kids? What do you think about killing mentally disabled people? And we found, in doing that, we saw 136 of the 138. We found people who may support the death penalty, for example, but not killing mentally disabled people. So out of that came the bill in 1992, the law that got passed that ended the death penalty in Kentucky for mentally disabled people, disabled with what was then called retardation. And that was sponsored. The bill was sponsored by Dottie Pretty in the House and Danny Meyer, Senator Danny Meyer, and both of whom at the time supported the death penalty in principle, but not this. And it started, we tried it in 90 and it failed. But in 92, when Danny picked it up on the Senate side, the two working together were able to pass this bill. Well, we felt great, we got this one done, and so let's move on to the next one. So at that point, there had been a Racial Justice Act introduced in Congress several times, and states were asked not to file it so that if it failed here, members in Congress from that state couldn't say, my people didn't want it, they killed it at the state level. So everybody backed off, nobody put it in at the state level. But by that time in Congress, in 92, 94, it became clear it was never going to pass there. Bill Clinton traded it out.
Yes, he did.
And he sold us out on that one.
That was,
so we tried it here, and it took Gerald, Neal. We followed this bill 4 sessions, and at that time it was every other year, right? So it wasn't until 98, and it was a compromised version, but that's what you get. I mean, it was symbolic, if nothing else. And that it was really powerful to get this passed. I remember Ben Chandler saying, Everett Hoffman and I are sitting in Ben Chandler's office, and Ben is saying, but Pat, if you pass this bill, all that's going to do is create work for our office. And I said, Ben, I am so sorry that we are creating work for the Attorney General of the state of Kentucky. That you don't know how that touches me, especially because you don't want us to protect people who are put on prison not because of what they did, but because of what they look like. He said, you're very smart using that race card, something like that.
Well,
Screw you,
I
Ben.
think the point that you're making there, which is, I think, so amazing for people, I think, in this age of social media and all of that, how you all were able to organize without the benefit of all of this technology and to get people to come out and do stuff, but the sophistication of many in the movement. John Lewis was just saying about the smart way that Dr. King and them understood how to use the media to tell the story.
Oh yeah, they were strategists.
And sometimes people miss that, that you all strategically said, well, let's talk about mental health. I mean, you could figure out how to you knew you couldn't get the whole hog right away.
Right, and we're still doing some of that.
Right.
There's a bill that's going to die because they're going to run out of time. There's a bill this session that got a hearing in the Senate and passed out of the committee for mental illness. And we thought, I don't know what happened exactly, and I'm not sure the sponsor does either, but we thought that bill would actually pass the Senate. And if it did, we were really pretty confident we can pass the bill. We got the numbers, the votes are there. But part of the key to the Racial Justice Act was Senator Neal. He made me his legislative aide. So with that, I had a badge that got me on the floor of the Senate, and I had access to his office. And we could sit there and use the phones, and you need a copy of this, somebody make you a copy of it. And it was a really incredible experience because he and I just work well together.
Who's also in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
We've interviewed Gerald.
I love Gerald. And Gerald, his family and mine go way, way back to before he was in law school. I didn't know him then, but Bob and Dolores did. And yeah, he's working with him as a treat. And he presses. I mean, he is so good. We had one guy, when we finally knew we were getting it in committee, we got a commitment from a state senator who at the time was new to the process. And he gets a call from his Commonwealth attorney the night before the committee meeting saying, don't vote for that bill. And fortunately, he told Gerald, I'm off that bill. So Gerald pulled it off the committee agenda. I thought, how do I deal with this? And I came home, I went to my office out at Catholic Charities, and I thought, I'm going to call everybody in his district tonight, and I'm going to have them call him not to complain, but to thank him for promising Senator Neal that he would vote for that bill in committee. And these were constituents. These were people on my list from Oldham County. And he did vote for that bill in committee. And I'll never forget that meeting. It was a special meeting called at the last minute by the chair off the floor. And they walked off the Senate chamber, they walked into that big room, they all sat around the table. The place was packed. And they went around, and David Williams, I'll never forget this, he looked at me and he pointed at me and he said, because this bill had already been voted down in committee once. He says, if you vote for this bill, you will make that man the happiest man in Kentucky, for you will have abolished the death penalty.
And David Williams was a Republican. He was the chair. He was the majority leader
at that time. This was still under the power of the Democrats.
Okay.
This is 98.
Okay.
So the vote goes down. Ernie Harris does the right thing. He votes for the bill. And the Associated Press guy comes up to me. He says, how do you react to Senator Williams? And Gerald's standing there. I said, oh, I don't react to Senator Williams. And Gerald says, good answer. Williams wouldn't speak to me for about 5 years.
Really?
And then when he finally did, we're best buddies again. I mean, it's just a real strange experience working up there.
He's from down there by Horse Cave and all of that, isn't he? Glasgow.
He is now a judge, and every report I get, and it doesn't surprise me, is that he really does good work as a judge.
Came to be a decent.
He visits prisoners.
Yeah. Wow.
He's out from under the pressure of having to be the leader of the party. I mean, I'm going to say even Mitch McConnell's not as bad as some people think he is, but he's as bad as he is because he's in the leader. There's things he doesn't believe half of that stuff, but that's what they do when they get to that point. And that doesn't mean they're not responsible for it.
Yeah.
It just means that they,
He's been pretty quiet.
Yeah, but they, just like David was a moderate Republican until he got in the leadership. But David Williams helped us pass the first human trafficking bill in Kentucky. Last year got all the press, but that passed several years ago. David Boswell was the sponsor, and he and I got called into his office. It was a really good bill, but Williams said, all this stuff in here that's going to require money, I can't do that. You take that out. This was training programs and things like that. Yeah. But what we did, we wanted a state law that if you're going to traffic people, you're going to get held. So all that stayed in, that it's a new law. If you get caught, you can be charged. And so we kept that. But David, and that day he looked at me and he says, and I'll tell you, he says, the reason I tolerate your sorry ass is because you stick up for principles. And from that day on, we were speaking again.
You also make the point that I guess people are far more layered than sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
We would know there's nuance to